All right, this is Math 103, 5.2 section on integers. So we're going to start with some basic operations for integers, and we're going to be adding and subtracting both positive and negative numbers. So back in the day when we first learned how to add things, we added positive numbers only. So, you know, Johnny had 15 apples and Susie gave him 3 apples. How many apples does he have now? So we know that we add those two numbers and we get 18. So when we're doing this, when we have the same sign, you are going to keep the sign and add the numbers. Okay, so the only thing that's changing when we have negative numbers, you want to think about money, okay? And so if you're borrowing $7 from somebody and you owe them $7, and then you borrow $13 more from that person, then you now owe them $20, and that owing comes from the negative number. So we go back to two positive numbers, 4 plus 28, we add 4, we add it to 28, and we are going to get 32. When we have negative numbers, sometimes they separate the negative numbers by parentheses, and so we're going to actually take 12 and add it to 41, but we're going to keep the sign negative, and that's going to make it a negative 53. Now, the hard part comes when we are adding signs with different numbers, okay? And so I used to teach this as a bucket method, but it just really kind of, I do use the bucket method, and when you use buckets, I think it's helpful to visualize this process. So I'm going to create a left bucket that is negative and a right bucket that is a positive, just so that you can see what I'm actually doing, okay? Then I'm going to put the positive number, which is 11, in the positive bucket, and I'm going to put the 14, which is negative, in the negative bucket. Now notice what I do is I don't put the sign in there because that's where the confusion comes into play. I just want to put those two numbers. And so now if you look at it, I know that my answer has to be negative because I have more things in the negative bucket. So I always put my sign with my answer first so that I don't forget it. And then I say, okay, well, how much more do I have in the negative bucket? And so to figure out the difference between those two numbers, I'm actually going to subtract 11 from 14, and that tells me that I have 3 more things in the negative bucket. So my answer is going to be negative 3. I think that's just a good visual. Then the other way, when you start to get positive and negative numbers all over the place, you can get a big mess. But I will show you an alternative way when we have some smaller numbers, okay? So I create a negative and positive bucket, put the numbers in those bucket, put numbers in the correct bucket, find the sign of your answer, and then take the difference between the two numbers, okay? So another way to think about it, and this is a great visual answer here, is that if you have 7 negative signs, I'm going to be focusing on this one right here. If I had 7 negative signs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then I have 3 positive signs, for every pair, a negative plus a positive makes 0. A negative plus a positive makes 0. And so you can see that I have 4 negative signs. Okay, and that would be my answer. So like I said, it gets really hard to do that when you have such large numbers. So that's why I like the buckets. If I do my negative bucket and my positive bucket, and I put 13 in the positive and 5 in the negative, clearly my answer is going to be positive. Now, I don't have to put the plus sign when I make a positive number, but I have 13 minus 5, which says that I have a positive 8. I have 8 more in the positive bucket than I do in the negative bucket. Okay? If I do here, we've got negative and positive, and then we have 8 in the negative bucket and 9 in the positive bucket. So again, my answer is going to be positive, and I have 1 more in that positive bucket. All right, the last one, we have 15. Whoops, I'll make that negative, sorry. I always make the left bucket negative because of the number line. So we have 15 in the positive bucket, we have 2 in the negative bucket, and so my answer would be positive 13. Again, I don't put the plus sign normally, but students always say, well, I got the right number, but I have the wrong sign. And I always say, oh, take that to your accountant. I have the right amount of money, but I've got the wrong sign. That's not going to work. So in this test especially, it's super duper important that you have the correct sign. Now there is a little ditty here that can help you remember this information. So it's kind of sung to row, row, row your boat. It goes, same signs add and keep, different signs subtract. Take the sign of the larger number, then you'll be exact. And when I'm in class, I usually make everybody sing it with me, but you had the joy of listening to me sing when I can't hold a tune. So now the thing is, we have subtracting integers, and that's the hard one, okay? That's where everybody gets confused. So I want you to think of subtraction as this definition. A minus B is the same as adding A plus the opposite of B, okay? So here's my little sign, or my little line, rhyming line that might help you. Draw a line, change the sign, okay? So what I want you also to remember is that when we have a double negative, that makes a positive. So a double negative is equal to a positive. And we'll actually learn that in just a minute when we do multiplication and division, okay? So the very first thing is I always rewrite these problems as an addition. So there's a lazy way. You can draw a line and change the sign. That's one way. Or I like to do it like this. I will get another color and I will make this double negative into a plus. Now, do I have to do the bucket method in this? Absolutely not, because it says 30 plus 7, and that gives me 37. Where the trouble lies in is when we have this problem and this problem that look very, very similar, but they are slightly different. Draw a line and change the sign, or realize that you have negative 14 and positive 10. So 14 goes in the negative bucket and 10 goes in the positive. So your answer is going to be negative because you've got more things in your negative bucket. And then we subtract 14 minus 10 and we get negative 4. Now on this one, you are going to draw a line and change the sign. So this becomes negative 14 plus negative 10. I'm just putting the parentheses there to separate the negative sign. And so now I've got everything in the negative bucket. So surely if I've got everything in the negative bucket, my answer is going to be negative. And when they're in the same bucket, I have to sum. So that is equal to negative 24. Two very similar problems that give you two very different answers, okay? So watch for that. So this one would become draw a line and change the sign. So now I have negative 19, so that goes in my negative bucket, and 8 goes in my positive bucket, so my answer will be negative 11, okay? All right, so here's some practice problems. I'm just going to go through real quickly. Again, you don't have to necessarily write them as an addition problem. If you look at that first problem and you see that it's 14 minus 3, I know how to do 14 minus 3 and I just subtract. But where it gets to be confusing is that when you have that smaller number minus a larger number, that's going to give you negative 11. Do you have to do the buckets? No, that's just a suggestion that might help you figure out what the sign of your answer is. This double negative is going to turn into a positive, and so now I have 3 plus 17, which gives me 20. This double negative turns into a positive, and so I have 4 in my negative. Whoops, I wrote 19, sorry. 4 in my negative and 19 in my positive, so that's going to be a positive 15. Change that. Negative 19 and positive 2, that makes negative 17. This becomes plus a negative, so now I've got 2 negative answers or 2 negative numbers that I'm going to sum because they're in the same bucket, and that makes it negative 40, okay? All right, so now we're going to get to multiplication division. Same signs always equal a positive answer. Different signs always equal a negative answer. And in multiplication, if you have an even number of negative signs, it will be positive. And if you have an odd number of negative signs, it will be negative. So really the chart that you need to learn, you really only need to learn one of them, but I do it like this. Positive times positive is positive. Negative times negative is positive. And of course, multiplication is commutative, so it doesn't matter the order that we do it. You have one sign of each, you will get a negative answer. With division, positive divided by positive is positive. Negative divided by negative is positive. And then if you have a sign of each, you will have a negative result. So we get negative 35 and positive 40. We get negative 10 and positive 11. Top number divided by the bottom number in your division problems. Now, the last thing that we're going to do, or actually before we get to order of operations, we're going to talk about dividing by 0 and we're going to talk about exponents, okay? So when we divide by 0, we have two situations. We have a 0 on the top, which is the numerator, or we have a 0 in the bottom, which is a denominator. So if you have a 0 on top, if I have $0 in my pocket and I want to divide it amongst my 7 friends, each friend gets $0, okay? Now, 0 is the only number that really technically doesn't have a sign. It's not positive, it's not negative, it's just 0. So we could have 0 divided by negative 3, and that equals 0. So the way I remember is 0 on top is okay. It is allowed to be 0 is allowed to be divided by a number, and we will get a 0 result. Now, in the other instance, if I have $11 and I want to break it into 0 groups, that is what we call undefined. It does not exist. We cannot take something and divide it into nothing, which is the same as if I had negative 8 divided by 0, that is going to be equaled undefined. Another way to say is that does not exist. If you do it on your calculator, it will actually say error, okay? So 0 divided by a number is okay. A number divided by 0 is no way. And that's how I remember it. And you will have one of those situations on your test, not both of them, because I got smart. Somebody guessed and they're like, well, I'm going to put 0 for both of them, at least get one of them right, okay? Now, with exponents, we have a big number, which is called our base, and we have a small number, which is called our exponent. And the exponent tells us how many times to write the base. So I write the base once, I write the base twice, I write the base 3 times, and then I multiply them out. The most common error that students do is that this does not equal 15. They take the base and they multiply it by the exponent, okay? So the thing that you have to be careful of is whether you have a negative sign that's included with the base or not included with the base. We're going to first look at the ones that are included, but starting here, this means 6 times 6, which is 36. Now on your calculator, you have this little caret top button, which means that raises it to a specific power. Down here, if we go to 2 to the third, that means 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8, not 6, okay? If the negative sign is in parentheses, that means it goes with the base, and so that gives me a positive 36. Here we have negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4, which is negative 64. Now, there was one instance where you will have a negative sign that is not included with the base and a negative sign that is included with the base. This negative sign is not included with the base. So what that means is that the negative sign is out in front and you are squaring the 5, which makes that answer always a negative answer. This one takes the negative sign with it, and so that becomes a positive 25. So what I always say, no parentheses around a negative base always makes the answer negative. Okay, if it's being raised to an exponent. So if you have no parentheses around the base, you will take that base, raise it to the exponent, and then make your answer. So I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to do the next section on order of operations.